Hello, Assalamu alaikum. What's up, guys? My name is Anas Faruqi, and today we will be learning osmosis. This is going to be our second way of transport. The first one was diffusion, our previous video, and today we will be learning osmosis. And let's begin. Firstly, we need to know the key definition of osmosis. What does osmosis mean? Osmosis is the net movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. So, in the key definition, there's a few things we need to notice. One is that the net movement, which I explained in the previous video, what the net movement means of water molecules. Diffusion was any sort of molecules when molecules move from higher concentration to lower concentration. But here in osmosis, this is specific to water molecules. When water molecules move from a higher water potential to a lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. आगे हम ये समझेंगे कि partially permeable membrane इसका what do they exactly mean by this. So okay, roles of water. So first we need to understand कि हमारी बॉडी में या इन इवन प्लांट्स इसका रोल क्या है पानी का, राइट. मोस्ट सेल्स कंटेन अबाउट 75% ऑफ वाटर एंड विल डाई इफ द वाटर कंटेंट्स fall much below this. Water is a good solvent and many substances move about in cells and in watery solutions. For example, in the blood is composed of plasma, right? And the plasma, majority of that plasma has water. तो बेसिकली वाटर इज़ अ गुड सॉल्वेंट जिसमें चीज़ ट्रैवल करती है, जैसे RBCs ट्रैवल इन द ब्लड एंड सो ऑन सो फॉर मेनी थिंग्स इन द ब्लड ट्रैवल एंड ब्लड कंसिस्ट मेजरली major content and its major solvent is made by water, right? So water is a very important component. Water molecules take part in vital chemical reaction. For example, in green plants, water combines with carbon dioxide to form glucose, and here they're talking about photosynthesis. In animals, water helps to break down and dissolve food molecules. Blood is made up of cell and a liquid called plasma. So as I discussed earlier, the blood which flows through your arteries and capillaries, it has plasma. One of its components is plasma, and that plasma in itself, it has 92% of water. That's how significant amount of water is present in the plasma, and is a way of transporting many dissolved substances like carbon dioxide, urea, digestive food, and hormones. So a lot of these things are transported through blood, and most of the blood solvent contains water. Blood cells are carried around and in the body through the plasma. Next is water is also a way of transporting materials in plants. Now over up here they discussed about in animals or in humans what was the function of water, but now next they're going to talk about the plants. Water is also a way of transporting materials in plants. Water passes up from the plants through the roots. So basically water enters the roots of the plants first, it moves up and then to the leaves in xylem vessels and carries dissolved mineral ions. That's number one function. Number two function of water is phloem vessels transport dissolved sugars and amino acids from leaves to where they are used or stored. So two functions in plants is water is absorbed through the roots. Number one, from the roots water moves up into the leaves through the xylem vessels, and what does that carry? It carries many dissolved mineral ions. These are used for the growth of the plant and for many functions. Number two is the phloem. Phloem vessels transport dissolved sugars and amino acid for what? Energy, right? And even after photosynthesis, when carbon dioxide and water are used and carbohydrate and oxygen are produced, where does this carbohydrate go? It is stored at many times and it is used as well. So it is stored and used and it's transported through these phloem vessels with the help of water, right? Water is an important process of excretion. Yeah, water is a process of excretion in animals. It is powerful solvent for excretory materials such as what? Such as urine. When us humans we excrete urine, and majority of the part of the urine or a significant amount contains water. So like nitrogenous molecules, urea, which is present, a component which is present in urine, as well as mineral ions, used hormones and drugs. The water has a diluting effect, so excretory materials are less toxic, such as when we sweat. A lot of the sweat has salt, but it also has water, and so goes for urine. A lot of the urine has a lot of uh, toxic compounds, nitrogenous compounds like urea. However, what it does is it has a diluting effect. Diluting effect means that because of water, it decreases the concentration of these solutes or these materials, excretory materials. So the ratio of water in this solution increases, and hence it makes the solution less toxic. All right. Next is the physical and chemical properties of water are different from those than most of the liquids. These make it uniquely effective in helping living activities. For example, water has a high capacity for heat. What does that mean? High capacity for heat. This means that it can absorb a lot of heat without its temperature rising to levels that damage the protein in the cytoplasm. This means that if we have water in a container jar, right? We can give it a lot of heat, but it's going to be able to tolerate most of that heat and it will resist increasing in temperature. तो होगा ये, अगर आप बहुत ज़्यादा टेम्परेचर गर्म टेम्परेचर में पानी को रखते हैं तो it takes time for it to get hot and for the temperature of the water to rise. Why is that? Because it has a high capacity for heat, right? So that's one thing. And then what's the what's the benefit we get from this? The benefit is that it prevents the damage of the proteins in the cytoplasm. If it did not have this feature, then the proteins in the cytoplasm would have gotten damaged, and that would be a problem for the cell in functioning. Next is not very important, but however, because water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, most cells are damaged if their temperature falls below this, and not really important here. Next. All right. So what let me just clear this out. All right. Next, what they are mentioning here is diffusion of water. Diffusion of water. Although we are learning osmosis right now, what do they mean? Let's dive deep into this. If a dilute solution is separated from a concentrated solution by a partially permeable membrane, water diffuses across this membrane, this from the dilute to the concentrated solution. This is called osmosis. So basically what they mean is the movement of water from the dilute, which means from a place of higher water potential to a place of lower water potential, which is a concentrated solution. The diffusion of these water molecules from from higher to lower, this phenomena is called osmosis. So it has a separate name for it, right? We wouldn't necessarily call it diffusion of water, we would give the name osmosis. Now what do they mean by partially permeable membrane, right? Partially permeable membrane. Let's first refer to this diagram that they have given to us below here. So they have shown here that there's a dilute solution, which means there is more H2O molecules present in this solution. However, on the left is a concentrated solution, meaning there is more salts and less water present in the left solution. So what was the phenomenon of osmosis? That water molecules move from a region of high water potential to a region of low water potential. So it's going to move from right to left through a partially permeable membrane. What do they mean partially permeable? Partially permeable means that some of the molecules move, some of the molecules move from the right to left. It's not that all of the molecules move from right to left, no. It means some of the molecules move from right to left, and that depends on the membrane's permeability. What does the membrane allow to move from the right to left, right? Some places you will see that it's written it's semi-permeable. Now why is that wrong? Semi means half. Now the reason why this is wrong is, let's suppose there are 10 molecules present on the right side, okay? It's not necessary that half of these 5 molecules move from right to left. That is not true. What is true is that the possibility could be that out of these 10, 2 molecules could move from right to left, 3 could move from right to left, even 5 could move from right to left. But it is not necessary. It's not necessary that half of them move from right to left. So that's why we use the term partially permeable, because it's partial. All right. Osmosis, water will diffuse from dilute solution of to the concentrated solution through a partially permeable membrane. As a result, the liquid levels will rise on the left and fall on the right. That's what they have shown here. They have shown that the levels on the left here have rose, and on the right they have dropped. Why? Because the water molecules move from the right to the left, hence levels rised here and dropped on the right side. All right. A partially permeable membrane is permeable but allows water to pass through more rapidly than dissolved substances. So this is something you should know, that it allows water to pass through more rapidly. Since a dilute solution effectively contains more water molecules than a concentrated solution, there is a concentration gradient, right? There's a difference of concentration of water molecules between a concentrated solution and a dilute solution, which encourages the passage of water to move from the dilute solution to the concentrated solution. That's what we have seen here, from the dilute to the concentrated solution. In living cells, the cell membrane is partially permeable, and the cytoplasm and vacuole contain dissolved substances. As a result, water tends to diffuse into the cell by osmosis if they're surrounded by weak solution, fresh water. However, if the cells are surrounded by a strong solution like seawater, the cells may lose the water by osmosis, which affects the described more fully later. Now let me give you an example. Here is a cell membrane, which is partially permeable, right? One example that they have given is fresh water. In fresh water, what it is that the solution outside of the cell has higher water potential. However, the solution inside the cell has lower water potential in comparison. इसकी वजह से जो पानी बाहर है सेल के बाहर वो move करेगा into the cell, right? However, if we have seawater में होता यह है कि there is more dissolved substances, and let's be more specific, it's a stronger solution, right? Because of that, there is less water potential outside the cell and more water potential inside the cell. इससे क्या होगा? Water is going to move from higher concentration to lower concentration, from inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. So that's one thing we need to note here. All right. Moving on, animal cells. The cell figure 3.1, 3.11 shown surrounded by pure water. Nothing is dissolved in the water. It has 100% concentration of water molecules, so that the concentration of free water molecules of the cell is greater than the concentration of. So basically what they mean is that the water molecules outside the cell have 100% concentration, and of course because of that the water is gonna, like, let's suppose here the water molecules are 100% over here. Of course the water molecules are going to move into the cell from higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. They will diffuse in the cell by osmosis. The membrane allows the water to go in and out. So in our example, water can move in or out of the cell. The cell membrane is partially permeable to most of the substances dissolved in the cytoplasm. So although the concentration of these substances inside may be high, they cannot diffuse freely out of the cell. So even a few substances, let's suppose there's glucose, right? There's glucose inside the cell and there's glucose outside the cell. Even if glucose inside the cell is in high concentration and glucose outside the cell is in low concentration, usually it should move from inside to outside. But the reason why sometimes that's not the case is because the cell membrane in itself is partially permeable. Because it's partially permeable, sometimes it allows this glucose to leave the cell, sometimes it doesn't. So that's something what they're trying to get at here, right? Now next, what they're saying, the water molecules move into and out of the cell, but because there are more of them outside, they will move in faster then they move outside. The liquid outside the cell does not have to be 100% pure water. If the concentration of water outside is higher than that of inside, water will diffuse by osmosis. It's very simple. As you can see, water molecules outside here are so many more than compared to inside. That's why water moves from higher to lower concentration, higher to lower water potential. The more appropriate term here to be used is water potential, and we will understand why this is the case. All right, so they have shown here there's higher concentration of free water molecules outside the cell than inside the cell, so water diffuses into the cell. The extra water makes the cell swell up. As you can see, now it is swollen up, right? Water entering the cell will make it to swell up, and unless the extra water is removed, so a lot of water is keep on entering the cell until the extra water is removed out of the cell, what's going to happen? In some way the cell will burst. It's actually going to burst. In the opposite situation, if the cell is surrounded by a solution which is more concentrated than the cytoplasm, water will pass out of the cell by osmosis and the cell is going to shrink. What's the two scenarios they have shown here? One is that the water molecules is moving inside the cell, it makes it swell up and then potentially burst even. And the second case is when water molecules move outside the cell, which makes the cell shrink. So these are the two cases that you need to know, right? Too much uptake or loss of water by osmosis may damage the cell. For this reason, it is very important that the cell in an animal's body are surrounded by a liquid which has the same concentration of liquid inside and outside the cell. So it's important that the concentration of these water molecules are same outside and inside, because so that we can prevent the shrinkage and we can prevent the bursting of the cell. In vertebrates, the brain monitors the concentration of blood and the kidneys adjust it. It's described in chapter 13. By keeping the blood concentration within a narrow limit, the concentration of the tissue fluid remains less or more constant. So the cells do not swell up by taking up too much water, or they do not shrink or get dehydrated by losing the water. All right. चलो फिर next चीज़ पे आ जाते हैं, plant cells. The cytoplasm of the plant cell and the cell sap in its vacuole contains mineral ions, sugars, and proteins. This reduces the concentration of free water molecules inside the cell. The cell wall is freely permeable to water and dissolved substances, but the cell membrane of the cytoplasm is partially permeable. So the cell wall is fully permeable. Everything can move into the cell and anything can move out of the cell. However, the cell membrane is what is the control system. It's seeing कि क्या चीज़ enter कर सकती है cell के, क्या चीज़ enter नहीं कर सकती. ठीक है, ये एक differentiating factor है cell membrane और cell wall के बीच में. ठीक है. If a plant cell is surrounded by water or a solution more dilute than its content, water will pass into the vacuole by osmosis. The vacuole will expand and press outwards on the cytoplasm, and the cell wall of the mature plant does not stress, so the inflow of water is limited by inelastic cell wall. तो एनिमल सेल में हमने क्या देखा कि एनिमल सेल में वो स्वेल अप कर गया सेल, ठीक है, लेकिन सिंस एनिमल सेल में सेल वॉल होता नहीं है, इट हैज़ अ पोटेंशियल ऑफ बर्स्टिंग, राइट. हाउएवर अगर आप यहाँ देखें, एक ये रही सेल मेम्ब्रेन एंड एक ये रहा सेल वॉल. सेल वॉल की वजह से ना, बिकॉज इट्स रिजिड स्ट्रक्चर एंड इट्स इनएलास्टिक. व्हाट डज दैट मीन? कि अगर पानी बाहर से अंदर आ भी जाए एंड सेल स्वेल अप कर भी जाए, जो वैक्यूल है विच स्टोर्स द वाटर, इफ इट इवन प्रेसेस अगेंस्ट द सेल वॉल, व्हाट हैपेंस इज सेल वॉल इतना इनएलास्टिक है, इनएलास्टिक मीन वो स्ट्रेच नहीं कर पाता है, उसकी वजह से सेल बर्स्ट ही नहीं होता. So that's something you need to know. The cell will not burst in this situation, right? And then it makes it push against the cell wall. The vacuole pushes against the cell wall, right? This has a similar effect to blowing up a soft bicycle tire. The tire is likely firm cell wall and the floppy tube is like the cytoplasm, and the air inside is the vacuole. It's a great example they have given here. If enough air is pumped in, for example, enough water is entered into the cell, a vacuole, it pushes the inner tube against the tire and makes the tire hard. So It pushes the vacuole onto the cell wall and makes the cell wall rigid. When plant cells have absorbed maximum amount of water by osmosis, they become very rigid due to the pressure of water pressing outwards on the cell wall. As a result, the stems and leaves are supported. This is a good thing. This is a good thing that they get supported. If the cell loses water, there is no longer any water pressure pressing outwards against the cell wall, so the stem and leaves are not supported anymore. And at this point, the plant becomes limp and wilts. It droops. What does that mean? Look at this. This is a normal plant. Why are the leaves in normal position, right? They're in normal position because of the fact that the cell wall is rigid. However, if it um, loses the water and the cell wall is no longer rigid and it no longer is supported, the plant leaves wilt. They lose their support, right? They lose their rigidity. They start drooping. Drooping means they start, like you can say, bending or falling downwards. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट वाटर पोटेंशियल. हम इतनी बार वाटर पोटेंशियल के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. नाउ what is water potential? The water potential of a solution is a measure of whether it is likely to lose or gain water molecules from another solution. A dilute solution has high water proportion for free water molecules, so it has a higher water potential than a concentrated solution. So basically जो बेसिकली जिसमें वाटर मॉलिक्यूल ज़्यादा होंगे उसमें वाटर पोटेंशियल उसका ज़्यादा होगा. ठीक है. As is basically one thing you need to know. Water will flow from the dilute to the concentrated solution, from high potential to low potential. Pure water has the highest possible water potential because water molecules will flow from it to the other aqueous solution even if it is very dilute. When cells containing sap with different water potentials are in contact with each other, a water potential gradient is made. What does that gradient mean? किसी सैप में ज़्यादा है पानी, किसी सैप में कम है, तो इन दोनों का difference, basically there's a difference between them. That's the gradient difference, right? Water will move from a cell from with higher water potential to a lower water potential. बहुत बार हमने ये चीज़ डिस्कस कर ली कि higher water potential, lower water potential. All right. Moving on. The importance of water potential and osmosis in plants. A plant cell with a vacuole pushing outwards makes the cell wall rigid, basically rigid, and another word we can use is turgid. Turgid, right? Turgid. Turgid, what does turgid mean? It is a swollen up because of the cell has taken water. And the vacuole is exerting turgor pressure on it. So these are a few keywords you need to use. Instead of using rigid, you can use turgid. And why is it turgid? Because the cell has swollen up because the vacuole is exerting turgor pressure on it, right? On the inelastic cell wall, turgor pressure is the force inside the cell which pushes outward, pushing the cell membrane against the cell wall. If all the cells in leaf and stems are turgid, the stem will be firm and upright, as you can see here. The leaves are held out straight. If the vacuoles lose water for any reason, the cell will lose their turgor, a process called plasmolysis, and become flaccid. As you can see here, it lost its turgidity and has become flaccid. Root hair cells are touching water trapped between soil particles. When the water potential of the cell sap is lower than the water potential of the soil water, the water will enter the cell by osmosis. This gives the plants the water it needs. So the water is moving from the soil into the cells because the soil has more water potential, right? And this is described in the water intake chapter. Water uptake chapter. When a farmer spreads chemical fertilizer onto the soil, the fertilizer dissolves in the soil water. Too much fertilizer can lower the water potential. That's bad because water potential should be high in the soil. However, now water potential drops because of these fertilizers, these chemical fertilizers, and it lowers the water potential of the soil water. This can draw the water out of the plant root hair cells by osmosis. So the water could move from the roots to the soil, and that's bad because the plants need the water for their chemical functions. The plant can wilt and die, as you can see here. It can wilt and die. Irrigation of crops, the supply and controlled amount of water to the plant as they need it, can have a similar effect. Irrigation which provides just enough water for the plants can lead to buildup of salts in the soil. The salts will eventually cause the soil water to have a lower water potential, of course, because एक पॉइंट आएगा कि हाँ वो पानी वो दे रहे हैं, लेकिन पानी के साथ देयर इज़ ऑल्सो सॉइल की जो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन है ना वो भी कांस्टेंट रहेगी, बट देयर विल बी अ पॉइंट कि जो पानी है इट मूव्स इनटू द प्लांट एंड देन फिर जो सॉइल में जो पानी बच गया है वो कम होता रहेगा, इट विल कीप डिक्रीजिंग एंड देयर विल बी अ पॉइंट वेयर द सॉइल विल हैव लो वाटर पोटेंशियल एंड then what's going to happen, the crops can no longer be grown on that land and they will wilt. Why? Because water starts moving from the plant into the soil because the soil has low water potential. Crops can no longer be grown on the land because they wilt and die through water loss by osmosis. Much agricultural land in host countries has become in hot countries have become unusable because of the side effects of irrigation. All right. Okay, moving on. This is we're almost done with this video. Don't worry, guys. Chalo, next has some countries apply salt to roads in the winter, stops the formation of ice. However, vehicles wheels splash the salt onto the plants as the side of the road, blah blah blah. What they basically are saying here is they some countries put soil salts on the road, and because the cars drive on the road, these salts actually they splash onto the plants which are on the roadside, on the sides of the road, right? And because of that more salts enter into the soils, which basically decreases the water potential of the soil, and at the end of the day the water is lost from the roots through osmosis. Lastly, the importance of water potential and osmosis in animal cell and tissues. It is important that the fluid which bathes the cell in animals like tissue fluid, blood, plasma has the same water potential as the cell contents. We already discussed. Why is that? So that there is no cell burst, there is no cell shrinkage, things like these. This prevents any net flow of water into and out of the cell. If the bathing of fluid has higher water potential, weaker concentration, then the cell water will move into the cell by osmosis, causing the cell to swell up. And animal cells have no cell wall, and that's a bad thing because and the membrane has less strength. Water should continue to enter. The cell will eventually burst. That's why it's bad. Single-celled animals like amoeba living in fresh water obviously have a problem. They avoid bursting by having contractile vacuole. This collects the water as it enters the cell and regularly releases it. See, there should be a releasing mechanism so that it does not burst through the cell membrane, keeping the water content of the cell under control. When surgeons, okay, so this is how amoeba regulates is water control. When surgeons carry out operations on a patient, internal organs on internal organs they sometimes need to rinse the wounds, right? They need to wash it out. Pure water cannot be used. This would enter the cell and it met and cause them to burst. So this is very dangerous. Already we're in a dangerous situation while doing surgery, and if we just apply some pure water, the pure water is going to enter the cells and it's going to make them burst. That's not good. So what do they use? They use a saline solution, a solution with the same water potential as the tissue, and hence they can clean the wounds. At the same time, the solution, the water from the solution does not enter the cell and does not make it burst. So this is a safe procedure. During physical activity, the body may sweat to keep the steady temperature. If liquids are not drunk to make the water loss through the sweating, the body can become dehydrated, right? Because in sweating, there a quite significant portion of the sweat is the water molecules, and when we lose these water molecules, we become dehydrated. Loss of water from the blood results in the plasma becoming more concentrated because of less water. Water is then drawn out of the red blood cells by osmosis. The cell has becomes plasmolized. Their surface area is reduced, so they are less effective in carrying oxygen. These are the RBCs, and as you can see, they're plasmolized. They have shrunk. Usually they are, let me show you, usually they are like completely normally rounded, but you can see they have their boundaries, they have shrinked, right? And what they're basically explaining here, over here, is that let's suppose we have an artery over here. In the artery we have some RBCs flowing, right? Let's suppose this is one RBC, this is the second RBC, and in these RBCs we have plasma, the plasma fluid which the RBCs are flowing in. What they're saying here is, while when you sweat you lose water from the plasma, and a lot of the water potential in the plasma decrease. So the H2O decreases in the plasma. What happens here is the RBC loses its water, and that enters into the plasma to maintain and balance the water potential in the plasma. And because of this, since water moves from the RBC from inside to the outside into the plasma, the RBCs shrink. And that's what they basically mean here, that the RBCs have shrunk and they're plasmolized. This is another term that you can use for the RBCs, the cell or the RBCs to shrink. People doing sports sometimes use sport drinks which are isotonic. Isotonic means they have the same water potential outside and inside. They have the same water potential as the body fluids. What does this do? The drinks contain water, salts, and glucose. They are designed to replace lost water and salts when you're sweating, and provide energy without creating osmotic problems to the body cells. However, use of these drinks when not exercising vigorously can lead to weight gain. That's a bad thing. In the same way as prolonged use of any sugar rich drink. So these sports drink, what they do is they provide energy, number one. Number two, they provide such a solution in which it has equal amount of water potential as the water potential in our body, so that even when we're sweating we don't get dehydrated, because we still have equal amount of fluids present in our body through these drinks. So this is it for osmosis. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope the osmosis is clear to you guys, and we'll meet you in the next video.